God has a purpose for every life. Even before you were formed in your mother's womb, He knew you. He saw the road ahead, the obstacles you would face, the triumphs you would experience, and the purpose for which you were created. You are not here by mere chance. While the world may tell you that life is random and that you're just the result of chance, the Word of God speaks otherwise. It declares that you were fearfully and wonderfully made, designed by the Creator Himself with a divine purpose. At times, it's hard to recognize God's plan in the midst of life's struggles. You might be facing difficulties now that make you question whether God is truly guiding you. There may be confusion, loss, or disappointment that makes you doubt if you're on the right path. But the Bible reminds us that God's ways are higher than ours, and His thoughts far beyond our own. What we see now is only a tiny part of the grand picture He is creating. God's plan is often not revealed all at once. He unfolds it step by step, teaching us to walk by faith, not by sight. When He called Abraham, He didn't provide a complete map of where Abraham was going. He simply told him to go, to trust, to walk in faith, and He would reveal the land. Abraham obeyed, not knowing where he was headed, but trusting that God's promise was steadfast. Similarly, God calls you to trust Him even when the future is uncertain. Sometimes God's plan requires separation. He may remove people from your life, not to punish you, but to prepare you for what He is bringing. Not everyone is meant to walk with you to where God is leading you. Some relationships were meant for a season, but God knows when that season has ended. He removes distractions, unhealthy influences, and those who would hinder your spiritual growth. This is why trusting His plan requires obedience. It means surrendering your desires, your friendships, your ambitions, and even your comfort for what He has in store. Many people struggle with surrendering because they fear what they don't fully understand. But God's plan is one of hope, not destruction. Jeremiah 29:11 declares, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." What a promise. Even when life feels uncertain, God is at work behind the scenes, setting up the right opportunities, opening doors that no one can close, and guiding you toward the destiny He has prepared. Sometimes we resist His plan because we have our own vision of how life should unfold. We set expectations, timelines, and goals. And when things don't happen according to our schedule, we get frustrated. But the Bible reminds us to trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not on our own understanding. God's timing is perfect even when it doesn't match ours. What may seem like a delay is often divine protection. What might feel like rejection is often redirection. God knows what is best for you, and He is constantly working for your benefit. Walking in God's plan requires faith. It means trusting that He is guiding you even when you can't see the whole picture. It means believing that He is making a way even when the path ahead seems unclear. And it means finding peace in the truth that He will never leave you or forsake you. When you surrender your plans to God, you're not losing control. You are placing your life in the hands of the One who holds everything in His power. Life is a journey of seasons, and with each season, different people come and go. Some relationships are meant to last a lifetime, while others are meant to be part of your journey for a season. It can be hard to accept when people leave, especially when you form strong connections. But one of the most important lessons we must learn is that not everyone who begins with us is meant to stay. There are times when God will remove certain individuals from your life, not because they are bad, but because their role in your journey has been completed. This can be painful, especially when you don't understand why. You might ask, why did this person leave? Why did this friendship end? Why did this relationship break down? But the reality is that God sees what we cannot. He knows the hearts of others. He knows the direction your life is meant to take. And sometimes he will separate you from others to bring you closer to where he wants you to be. Look at Abraham and Lot. They began their journey together, but at a certain point, they had to part ways. They had different callings and different assignments, and God's plan for Abraham required separation. Had Abraham held on to Lot, he might have delayed the blessings that God had in store for him. In the same way, when God calls you to a new level, not everyone will be able to go with you. Some people are only meant to be with you for a specific season, and when that season ends, you must be willing to move forward without them. Clinging to the wrong people can hinder your spiritual growth. When you try to force relationships that God has already released you from, you risk delaying your destiny. Sometimes we hold on out of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of change, or fear of the unknown. But faith requires trust. Trust that God knows what he's doing. Trust that if he has allowed someone to leave, he has a reason for it. And trust that he will bring the right people into your life at the right time. Some people leave because they were never meant to stay. Others depart because they were sent to teach you something for a specific season. Still others leave because God is shielding you from something you cannot yet see. Whatever the reason, do not let the loss of a single person make you question God's plan. Do not hold on too tightly to relationships that you miss the new opportunities, new connections, and blessings God is bringing into your life. When Jesus walked on earth, even he faced people walking away. Many followed him for a while, but when the journey grew tough, they turned back. Even some of his closest disciples struggled to stay. Yet Jesus never chased after those who left. He stayed focused on his mission, knowing that God's will was more important than any temporary loss. In the same way, do not let the departure of people pull you away from your purpose. Seasons change, friendships shift, relationships evolve, but God remains constant. He is the one unchanging force in your life, the one who will never abandon or forsake you. As you continue to walk in his will, you will begin to see that every person who left, every relationship that ended, and every door that closed was part of his greater plan. Even in moments of loss, God is still in control. There will be times in life when people walk away, relationships break, and doors unexpectedly close. When this happens, it can be painful and confusing. You may wonder why things didn't turn out as expected, why a close friendship faded, or why someone you trusted walked away. It's in these moments of loss that we must hold on to this powerful truth. When God removes someone from your life, he is not trying to hurt you, he is protecting you. God sees what we cannot. He understands the hearts and intentions of every person. While you may see someone's outward kindness, God sees their hidden motives. While you may believe that a person belongs in your future, God knows they may become a stumbling block later. This is why he sometimes removes people, even when we don't understand. What feels like rejection is often divine protection. What seems like painful loss is actually God shielding you from something greater. Throughout the Bible, we see how God removes people for the sake of his larger plan. When Saul was rejected as king, Samuel mourned for him. He couldn't understand why God had taken away someone he had anointed. But God spoke to Samuel saying, "How long will you mourn for what I have rejected?" Sometimes we are like Samuel, holding on to what God has already removed, grieving over what he has already released us from. What we fail to recognize is that when God takes something away, it is because he has something far better planned. There are times when relationships may appear perfect on the surface, but God knows what lies ahead. You might believe that a friend or partner is meant to walk with you forever, but God sees whether they will turn against you in the future. He knows if their presence will prevent you from fulfilling your calling. He understands if they will pull you away from your purpose. In His mercy, He steps in and removes them, not to break your heart, but to protect it from something far worse. One of the hardest parts of God's protection is that it doesn't always seem like protection in the moment. Sometimes it looks like heartbreak, disappointment, or answered prayers. You may have begged God to let a relationship work, to restore a broken friendship, or to open a door that has suddenly shut. But what if God was sparing you? What if He was closing that door to protect you from future pain? What if He was ending something before it could harm you? When God removes people, we often ask why. But the real question should be, Lord, what are you protecting me from? Instead of fighting to hold on, we must trust that His ways are higher than ours. He is the good shepherd who leads us beside still waters and away from danger. He knows where the road leads, and if He blocks a path, it's because He sees what's waiting on the other side. Even Jesus, during His time on earth, experienced betrayal and separation. Not everyone who walked with Him stayed. Judas was close to Jesus, but his heart was not right. Had Jesus tried to keep Judas from leaving, he would have been blocking God's will. He understood that sometimes people must leave for God's purpose to be fulfilled. Similarly, when people walk away from your life, don't chase after them. Don't fight to hold on to what God is removing. Instead, trust that He knows what He's doing. God's protection is often disguised as loss. What you thought you needed may have been the very thing preventing you from stepping into your destiny. What seemed good for you may have been a hidden trap. Trusting God means believing that every removal is for your good, even when you don't understand, even when it hurts, even when you feel alone. Know that He is working behind the scenes. He is shielding you, guiding you, and preparing you for something greater. Letting go is one of the most difficult things we will ever have to do in life. Whether it's a relationship, a friendship, a job, a dream, or even a season of life, releasing what we once held dear is never easy. The human heart yearns for stability, for what's familiar, for the comfort of what we know. Yet time and time again, God calls us to step out in faith, to let go of the things we are holding on to, and to trust that He knows what's best for us. Faith is not merely about believing in God when life is smooth. Faith is about trusting Him when He asks you to release something you never imagined having to let go of. It is about trusting that His plans far exceed yours, even when you don't fully understand. It means surrendering your desires, your expectations, and your attachments, knowing that He sees the whole picture while we only see a fragment. One of the greatest examples of letting go in faith is found in Abraham's story. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, and in his old age, that promise came true through his son Isaac. But then God asked him to do something that tested his faith like never before. He told Abraham to take Isaac to the mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. Imagine the weight of that request. After waiting so long for the promise, after finally receiving the blessing, God now asked Abraham to give it up. It must have seemed incomprehensible to Abraham, but despite his confusion and pain, he obeyed. He let go in faith, and just at the last moment, God provided a ram in the thicket, proving that He never intended to take Isaac away. He was simply testing Abraham's trust. Sometimes God will ask you to release something, not because He intends to take it away for good, but because He wants to know if you trust Him enough to surrender it. Other times He asks you to let go because He has something better prepared for you. But the test remains the same. Will you hold on because of fear, or will you trust Him enough to open your hands and let go? Letting go requires faith because it forces us to step into uncertainty. It asks us to leave behind what's comfortable and familiar, even when we don't yet see what God has planned. Peter experienced this firsthand when Jesus called him to step out of the boat and walk on water. As long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he was able to do the impossible. But when he focused on the wind and the waves, he began to sink. That's what happens when we try to hold on to what God is asking us to release. The fear of the unknown becomes greater than our faith in the one who is guiding us. Many times we hold on to things because of fear of being alone, fear of failing, or fear that if we let go we may never receive something better. But God has not given us a spirit of fear. He has given us a spirit of power, of love, and of a sound mind. When he calls you to release something, he is not leading you toward destruction. He is guiding you into your purpose. He is making room for something greater, something beyond what you could ever ask or imagine. So letting go does not mean you have failed. It does not mean you are losing. It means you are surrendering to God's will, trusting that his plans are far greater than yours. It means choosing faith over fear, obedience over comfort, and trust over control. It is through the release that God moves. It is in surrender that his power is revealed. In letting go, you position yourself to receive all that God has prepared for you. Obedience to God is the key that opens the door to his blessings in our lives. From the beginning, God has called his people to follow his voice, to walk in his ways, and to trust his command. Time and again, Scripture shows that when people choose obedience, they receive God's favor, his provision, and his protection. But when they walk in disobedience, they experience struggle, delay, and unnecessary hardship. Obedience is not about following rules for the sake of religion. It is about aligning your life with God's perfect will so you can walk in the fullness of his plan. God's blessings are tied to our willingness to trust him. He has given us his word, filled with instructions on how to live, love, and honor him. But too often, people pick and choose which commands they want to follow, treating obedience as an option rather than a necessity. The truth is, partial obedience is still disobedient. When God speaks, he expects us to respond in faith, not hesitation, even when we don't understand, even when his instructions seem hard. Obedience is always the path to greater blessings. One of the clearest examples of obedience leading to blessings is found in Abraham's life. When God called him to leave his home and go to a land he had never seen, Abraham could have refused. He could have stayed in his comfort zone, afraid of the unknown. But he obeyed, and because of his faith, God made him the father of many nations. The blessings that followed Abraham's obedience were beyond what he could have ever imagined. His willingness to trust God, even without knowing the full plan, placed him on a path of divine favor. Obedience is not always easy. Sometimes it requires sacrifice. It may mean letting go of relationships, walking away from opportunities, or making choices that others may not understand. But every time you obey, you position yourself for God's best. Look at Peter's story. When Jesus told him to cast his net into the water, Peter had already been fishing all night without success. In his human reasoning, there was no point in trying again, but he obeyed the Lord's command, and his nets returned overflowing with fish. The miracle was made possible because of his obedience. Many times people pray for blessings but fail to realize that blessings follow obedience. They ask God for growth but are unwilling to be faithful with what they already have. They ask for open doors but refuse to walk through the ones he has already provided. They pray for breakthroughs but hesitate when God calls them to take a step of faith. God honors those who trust him fully. He seeks people who will follow his voice even when it seems illogical. Disobedience, on the other hand, brings consequences. When Adam and Eve chose to disobey God, they lost the paradise he had given them. When Jonah ran from his calling, he found himself in the belly of a great fish. When the Israelites refused to trust God in the wilderness, they wandered for 40 years instead of entering the promised land. Delayed obedience is still disobedience, and each act of disobedience carries a cost. But the good news is that God is merciful. Even when we fail in obedience, he provides opportunities to return. He is not seeking perfection. He is seeking a willing heart. He blesses those who seek him, follow him, and surrender their ways for his. When you choose to obey, even in the small things, you are positioning yourself for his favor. You are aligning your life with his purpose. You are walking the path that leads to his greatest blessings. Growth is a process, and spiritual growth is no different. It doesn't happen by chance, nor does it come without effort, discipline, and refinement. Just as a tree must be pruned to produce more fruit, we too must be pruned on our spiritual journey. Pruning is the process of removing what is unnecessary. God, as the master gardener, knows exactly what needs to be removed from our lives to help us grow stronger in him. Jesus spoke about pruning in John 15:02, saying, "Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes so that it will bear more fruit." This means that even when we are growing, even when we are walking in the right direction, God will still prune us. He will cut away distractions, unhealthy attachments, and areas of our lives that hinder our spiritual growth. Pruning is not punishment. It is preparation. It is the way God shapes us, molds us, and makes us more like him. One of the most difficult parts of pruning is that it often involves loss. God may remove people from your life who do not align with your purpose. He may close doors that you once desperately sought to walk through. He may strip away habits, desires, and comforts you relied on. In the moment, it may feel like you are losing, but in reality, you are being positioned for something far greater. A tree doesn't resist the pruning process. It yields to the hands of the gardener. Similarly, we must trust that when God removes something, it's because he's making space for something better. Pruning also demands patience. Growth doesn't happen instantly. When a branch is pruned, it takes time for new fruit to grow. Many people become discouraged when they don't see immediate progress. They wonder why they are still facing struggles, why breakthroughs are delayed, or why their spiritual growth seems slow. But just because you can't see growth doesn't mean it isn't happening. God is working beneath the surface, strengthening your roots, deepening your faith, and preparing you for the next season. Sometimes pruning takes the form of trials. God allows challenges, not to break us. The hardships you face aren't meant to destroy you. They are meant to strengthen your character, increase your faith, and teach you to rely solely on God. Just as fire refines gold, trials refine our spirits. They reveal what's truly in our hearts and expose areas where we need growth. Without challenges, we remain spiritually stagnant, but when we embrace the process, we come out stronger, wiser, and better prepared for what God has ahead. One of the greatest examples of spiritual pruning is seen in Joseph's life. God had grand plans for Joseph. But before he could step into his destiny, he had to undergo a season of pruning. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. On the outside, it seemed like he was losing everything. But in reality, God was shaping him for the position he would one day occupy. Every trial, every loss, and every hardship was part of God's plan to prepare him for greatness. When the time was right, Joseph stepped into his calling, and Because he had been refined through the process, he was equipped to handle the blessings that followed. Spiritual pruning is not about taking away, it's about creating space for more. God wants to remove anything in your life that is holding you back from your full potential. He desires to strip away fear, doubt, pride, and anything that hinders your spiritual growth. Though the process may be painful, the result is always worth it. When you surrender to his pruning, you grow stronger, more fruitful, and more aligned with his purpose. Waiting is one of the toughest challenges in life. It's hard to be patient when you're longing for an answer, seeking a breakthrough, or waiting for a promise to come to pass. In a fast-paced world where everything is instant, waiting can be frustrating. But God doesn't operate on human schedules. His timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't align with our expectations. Trusting his timing requires faith, surrender, and a deep understanding that he sees the full picture while we only see a small part. Throughout Scripture, we see how God works according to his divine plan. He is never late, never early, but always right on time. Abraham and Sarah waited for years for the fulfillment of God's promise, a child who would make them the parents of nations. But in their impatience, they attempted to take matters into their own hands, which resulted in unnecessary hardship. Had they trusted God's perfect timing, they would have avoided the struggles caused by their impatience. How often do we try to step ahead of God, trying to force something to happen instead of waiting for his best? Impatience often leads to decisions we later regret. But trusting God's timing always results in blessing. God's timing is not only about when something happens, but also about preparing us for what lies ahead. Sometimes he delays certain blessings because we are not yet equipped to handle them. A blessing that comes too soon can become a burden. A door opened before its time can lead to failure. God knows what's best, and he knows when we are truly ready for the next step. What feels like a delay is often God's way of protecting us from stepping into something too soon. He is developing our character, strengthening our faith, and shaping us into the people we need to be before he opens the next door. Trusting God's timing also requires surrendering control. It's human nature to want to plan, to predict, and to understand everything. But faith is not about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. When Jesus walked the earth, he never rushed. He moved in perfect harmony with God's plan, never ahead, never behind. Even when his friend Lazarus was sick, Jesus did not hurry to heal him. Instead, he waited, and through that waiting, a greater miracle unfolded. Lazarus was raised from the dead. Had Jesus arrived earlier, people would have witnessed only a healing, but by waiting, they saw resurrection power. Sometimes God's delays are not denials, they are setups for something far greater. Waiting on God requires patience, but it also demands action. Trusting his timing does not mean doing nothing. It means being faithful where you are while trusting that he is working behind the scenes. Joseph, after being sold into slavery and wrongfully imprisoned, did not sit idle waiting for his breakthrough. He remained faithful in every season, serving with excellence, even in challenging circumstances. And when the time came, God elevated him to a position of power and influence. Your waiting season is not wasted. God is using it to prepare you, to strengthen you, and to position you for what is ahead. One of the greatest tests in trusting God's timing is when it seems like he is blessing others while you are still waiting. It can be tempting to compare your journey to someone else's and wonder why your prayers have not been answered. But God's plan for you is unique. Just because someone else is stepping into their season doesn't mean God has forgotten about you. He is not withholding his blessings. He is aligning them with his perfect will. What he has for you will come at the right time, in the right way, and nothing can stop it. Trusting God's timing means resting in the confidence that he is in control. It means believing that even when you don't see any visible progress, he is still at work. It means surrendering your plans, your deadlines, and your expectations, knowing that his ways are far greater than yours. When the time is right, everything will fall into place, not by your efforts, but by his perfect design. God's ways are beyond ours, and his timing, plans, and processes are always flawless. While life may bring seasons of waiting, pruning, letting go, and even hardship, each moment is part of his divine plan. Obeying his will opens the door to blessings, and trusting his timing brings peace beyond our understanding. Growth is never without difficulty, but God removes, refines, and redirects not to harm us, but to shape us into who he has destined us to be. Every trial, delay, and test of faith is preparing you for something greater. When you surrender to his process, trust his wisdom, and walk in obedience, you position yourself for the fullness of his blessings. No matter what you face, God is always working, always faithful, and always guiding you toward his perfect plan.